right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Autumn Epps with SHRM-Atlanta, and I am thrilled to have you all for today's sponsored webinar, Updating Your Employee Handbook for 2026. Before we get started, just a few quick Zoom tips and housekeeping. Please keep your microphone on mute during the presentation and feel free to use the chat or Q&A to submit questions. Our speaker will address them either during her presentation or at the end. And now I would like to hand it over to Emily with Thread.
Thanks, Autumn. I'm Emily Owensby with Thread HCM. It's great to see all of you today. I'm excited to welcome Christina Fiorenza, who will be walking us through the latest best practice updates to employee handbooks. She brings a wealth of HR expertise, and today's session is even more valuable thanks to our partnership with SHRM-Atlanta's Ask an Expert program. As year-end starts to get extra hectic, be sure to take advantage of this member resource after the webinar. It's a great way to get your specific HR questions answered by certified professionals. So, Christina, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Hope you are staying warm, as Autumn said. It's definitely freezing today to me, but it looks like we're going to be up in the 70s by the weekend, so I'm looking forward to that beautiful weather. So yes, as we talked about, we're going to talk about some different handbook items. We're going to talk about why do we even need to do a review of our handbook, talk about some federal updates, some Georgia state-specific laws, multi-state laws, looking at some core handbook sections that should be reviewed every year, talking about some emerging topics, and then best practices for making those updates and making sure that it gets out to all of your employees. So let's start. Let me make sure everybody is seeing the screen that says annual handbook reviews. Good. Okay, thank you. So let's just start with why they're so critical, right? Why do we need to review these? If we're not changing our policies, does it even matter? Why do we need to get another signature of acknowledgement? Well, outdated handbooks are one of the biggest hidden risks for us as employers because it can create compliance gaps, especially when state laws, federal laws, ordinances, city laws, all of the employment laws, they don't wait till the end of the year to change. They come in the middle of the year, they come 2 weeks, they come into play, and then they take them back the next month, as has happened with some paid sick leave laws. So it's really important to make sure that we're staying on top of it at least annually. And if you are a multi-state employer, maybe paying attention a little bit more than annually. Old policies can weaken our ability to enforce discipline and defend against claims, right? So you have this handbook of rules and policies for your employees to live by. And if the policies are incorrect or we've changed them mid-year and not informed our employees, it makes it harder for us to hold them accountable to those policies because we haven't made those updates and we haven't let them know. But it's more than just compliance. It's also about alignment and aligning our employees with the tone of our culture and what our expectations are. This is their playbook, if you think about it, right? We're handing it to them usually on their first day, if not beforehand, and saying, hey, this is what we're all about. This is what we're going to provide to you. Benefits, leave, holidays, all that good stuff. And this is what we expect out of you. Code of conduct, anti-harassment, all of those pieces. There's a lot of stuff in there, and I'm sure every HR professional on here believes wholeheartedly that their employees read every word of the handbook before they acknowledge it. Obviously they don't, so we need to make sure that we have described and explained everything that we are looking for in our team through this handbook so that if a question comes up, we can talk to them about it. And honestly, trends are changing all the time, right? Back from when COVID hit, everybody went home. Some people are in the office, some people are at home. So you're gonna hear me say that a lot, that we need to look at our policies to make sure that they work for both in the office and for hybrid. So what I want you to think throughout this is flexibility, transparency, and fairness, right? So it's important that our handbook and our policies reflect both legal requirements that we have to follow and our company values. So let's jump right in. We're going to start with our federal law updates that have either changed or are being scrutinized a little bit more by different departments. So the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act and PUMP Act continued enforcement with accommodations, breastfeeding, lactation breaks, and obligations on the employer. So we just want to make sure that our policies are not just compliant, but they're practical. right? So how do employees request a reasonable accommodation maybe during their pregnancy or afterwards, and they need to be sitting more than they need to be standing, right? And they've got a doctor's note. What do they do? Who do they go to? Right? And so that's easy enough in the office, but what do our policies say for the remote employees? Obviously, in the case I just said, easier for them to just sit down whenever they need to. Understand that. But what about breaks for lactation? And how are those scheduled? Again, easy enough to just step away from your computer if you work from home. But if you're in, let's say, a call center type environment where you have to be answering the phones, how do you schedule those breaks? So while you may have your policies in place for this, do they also fit with your hybrid or your work from home employees? So that's what I want you to take away for that one. Next up, the EEOC and the OFCCP, they are really focusing in this year on harassment prevention, pay equity, and bias in AI HR tools, which I know AI is on the top of everybody's mind, and we're definitely going to get to that. But let's go through a couple of these things with harassment, cracking down on harassment through guidance that addresses the modern workplace issues that we're talking about. So we need to have a more proactive approach to prevention, training, and investigations. Much harder to do those, or maybe harder isn't quite the right word. We have to get more creative in the way that we are training and handling investigations when we're not all in the same office. So we have Zoom, we have Teams meetings, we have all of these tools, but are we using them, and are we still being able to train effectively? And then how do we prevent harassment when we're all in this electronic world? So we really need to focus on defining and preventing harassment in this virtual and remote world, like social media, LinkedIn, just general websites, right? And that's a big deal, because harassment is not just done face to face in an office. That whole cyberbullying, that term exists for a reason. So we need to make sure that our policies also address it from that point of view. And we need to make sure that we've got multiple points of contact. This is a big one, and I know we as a team have reviewed all of our clients' handbooks to make sure this is in place. If somebody, or maybe I should say when, somebody files a claim or a complaint, we need to make sure that our complaint process in our handbook is very well spelled out, and that there's multiple points of contact. So if I just go to my manager, and let's say my manager doesn't do anything about it, then what do I do? Or heaven forbid, my manager is the one that's harassing me. Now where do I go? So I would challenge each of you to go back and look at your complaint procedure when it comes to harassment or filing a claim or a complaint, and making sure that you have those steps laid out clearly for your employees to be able to know who they can go to. We want to make sure that they are feeling supported. Let's see what's next on there. AI tools and HR, right? So a couple of hot topics here that we're going to want to make sure that we have spelled out in our handbook. Responsible use of the tool, right? So it's so common now. I know my whole team is using it. It helps us draft emails. It helps us redraft an email that maybe we wrote that doesn't sound very nice because we might be in a mood that day. So we're using it for all different reasons. An outline, we're using it to record meetings and transcribe it for us. So what we need to make sure is that we are setting clear expectations around responsible use. So our handbook needs to spell out which tools are approved, how to protect confidential information, and when does your employee need to disclose that they used AI in order to help them with the work. So this will help prevent data leaks, errors, or ethical issues before they happen, we hope. The second piece of the AI tools is data privacy and confidentiality, right? So we all know, or we've all been told, that if we put company or client or customer data out there, it's out there for the whole world to see. So we need to make sure that we're putting parameters around what can an employee put into AI, especially the unpaid ones. I understand that there are some paid AI tools that will protect the information that you put into it, and it won't be used to crowdsource information. But for right now, all of those public ones will take whatever information you put in there and use it for the next time, let's say Barb gets on and tries to get some information for something she's looking up. So we want to make sure that we're not exposing confidential information, and that company approved systems is what our team is using. The third topic on that, bias and fairness awareness. So not just an HR issue, it's a workplace culture issue. So if you think about it, you've got managers, I hope, that are doing some of their own recruiting. Maybe you're the recruiter, so you already know this. That may be using those AI tools where AI actually does an interview or AI is reviewing the resumes, right? What managers and other people that have not gone through this training need to understand is that AI decisions, including hiring or performance analytics, are subject to anti-discrimination laws. So we need to make sure that in our handbook, we're including something about making sure that the use of AI is ethical across all of the areas that it's used and it's not perpetuating previous bias. Excuse me. So the last, how do we make sure it's not bringing these bias in, is transparency and human oversight. That's the big one, is the human oversight. Policies should emphasize that AI is a support tool and it's not replaced for the human judgment, because we can't teach the computer human judgment. So when AI is used in hiring or evaluation or customer interactions, you always need to make sure that there is human review and accountability. Because if a decision is made and it's found out to be discriminatory, AI is not getting blamed. We are. So we need to make sure that we're following the right protocol. So a little sample for what you can say, short and sweet, doesn't have to be a huge long policy, but something along the lines of employees may use AI tools only for approved business purposes. They must follow the company data security policy and confidential standards. AI should assist, not replace, employee judgment. So employees are responsible for verifying the accuracy of the AI content, ensuring ethical and appropriate use. Boom, you've got one little sentence. Now, if you are using AI at a much higher level than just write this email, you'll probably need a bigger policy. All right, so on AI, and we're gonna come back to AI towards the end with emerging topics that we were talking about. So the next topic under the EEOC and OFCCP is pay equity. So I looked this up and there's a fancy name. The EEOC has a strategic enforcement plan that lasts 4 years. It started in 2024 and it's going through 2028. And what it states is that one of their main objectives is to advance equal pay for all workers. So we're gonna wanna make sure that we're reviewing our pay policies, our pay bands, promotions, even bonuses, to make sure that there's not any hidden biases in the way that we are making those decisions. I find that generally promotions and pay bands we get right. I have found that bonuses, especially the ones that are completely subjective, can sometimes not really work out in everybody's favor. So you want to make sure, if you can, with bonuses, that you kind of got a black and white way of figuring it out, if at all possible. The other thing with the pay equity, and we're going to talk about this, I think, in just a little bit, is making sure that you've got those salary bands set so that you can be transparent and talking to your employees about it. What you don't want to do is base somebody's salary on what they used to make. So more on that in just a minute. FLSA and overtime. So now we're switching over a little bit to pay and how you're paying your employees. The Department of Labor continually, and we all know this as HR professionals, continually are looking at the salary threshold for exempt level employees. We've had a change. It was going to go into effect at the last hour. They pulled it away. We're still talking about it. Probably does need to be changed. When's it going to be changed? I don't know. That's going to be one of those things that even when they do change it, I'm going to wait and see if it really gets called back in the end. But want to make sure that we are really looking at those salary thresholds, remembering that sometimes the salary threshold is different in different states that you operate. It's not just the federal level. The other thing that we really need to pay attention to and look at is the definition, or our definition and our practicality of it, between a 1099 contractor and an employee. And that misclassification, that's really being scrutinized right now. And so the reason I say that, and you might say, yeah, we know what the definition is, so why do we have to review it? What I'm telling you to review is what the employee is actually doing. Because we can all have beautiful, grand, wonderful titles, but that doesn't explain what we're doing. And I'm willing to bet that you've got a lot of employees who over time have started doing different things that aren't necessarily mentioned on the job description and that maybe haven't been reviewed lately and could fall into a non-exempt level if they're exempt and vice versa. So paying attention to those is really important. If we're going to do a review once a year, let's just go ahead and review the job descriptions too. Why not? And making sure that with the FLSA and the overtime and all that, really as it relates to non-exempt employees, so those employees clocking in and out that do get paid overtime, and what does that look like for the hybrid employees that you can't see and hear the work for. So making sure that you've got some good tight policies in there. Again, we'll talk about this a little bit more in just a minute. For NLRB guidance, there's been a lot of activity here, language around employee conduct, confidentiality, and social media needing to be tailored more so that it doesn't infringe upon employee rights and allows for a little bit more flexibility. And then finally, remote work and multi-state compliance. There it is again, remote work. Those are ongoing challenges because we need to make sure that we've got policies in place for where employees can work, how hours are tracked, what costs are reimbursable when they are traveling, if they're non-exempt, travel pay. So all of those things come into play, especially when you get into the multi-state. So again, more on that a little bit later. These are just the big things that I want you to think about on the federal level. All right. Let's move on to Georgia state specific. Although there's not a ton, we're not operating in California, which is nice because there's a law on how you blink and how many times you blink in a day. Georgia, we're a little bit more relaxed. So let's just talk about a few things that are there. First of all, the firearms in the workplace, just reminding us that Georgia's guns in the trunk law, that employees are allowed to keep firearms locked in their vehicle, and just making sure that your handbook has a good balance between compliance and workplace safety when it comes to that. Marijuana and drug testing, Georgia has not legalized recreational cannabis. Period. Done. Even possessions of a small amount are considered a misdemeanor in state law. So, all right, what do we do with that? Because we are neighboring with other states that do allow it. So while we haven't legalized medical or recreational use, neighboring states have, and that's what's going to create confusion sometimes in our policies. So look at your testing policies, especially around safety sensitive positions. Ensure that you define what under the influence means, both while at work or on company property but not working, right? So lots of little details to look through that, clarifying that the results of a positive drug test, what that will do, and make sure that you state in your policy that even with the medical card, Georgia law does not require employees to accommodate the use of medical cannabis, right? Doesn't require you to. Now, let's talk about the drug-free workplace program that Georgia has, which is awesome because you get to reduce your discount on workers' comp. The program for that specifically requires testing for marijuana. So just wanted to throw that in there if that is something that you're looking at doing, which is a great discount. So all that to say, for Georgia policies on marijuana and drug testing is just make sure that you have it spelled out very clearly on what you will accept and what you won't accept. And then you're going to want to make sure that you apply that equally across your teams. All right, finally, Georgia's stance on paid sick leave and local PTO trends. So we still do not have a statewide mandate on required paid sick leave like a lot of other states do, but the number of states that are requiring that are growing and growing. Georgia probably one of the last ones, but still doesn't hurt to look at, what do your PTO policies look like? Are they gracious enough? Do they help with work-life balance? Maybe you want to benchmark against other states that are allowing for that paid sick leave, and what are some wellness trends? So really looking at that, PTO trends, how much time are you giving? Are you relaxed with it? And then furthermore, how do you make that work with the person who works from home? And are they really taking the day off? Are they working? So lots of things to consider there, but no big Georgia state laws that we need to review in time for next year. Now, I did say that we would talk a little bit about multi-state considerations. I know that we consult almost every state in the U.S., and I know that many of you, while you may be working in Georgia, may have remote employees in other states. So things to think about with the multiple state, because that can become tricky when you're trying to make one policy fit for the whole company. So as we just talked about, paid family and sick leave laws are expanding. California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, all the normal culprits. So you may want to try to create a universal policy that fits for all of them. I know one of the things that we've done for a couple of clients is whatever the most generous paid sick leave policy is, we use that as a starting point for their PTO policy and build from there. Some of the things that get really tricky with that is the requirements for rollover on the paid sick leaves do vary by state. So I have a handful of clients who have one beautiful, really nice PTO policy for everybody. And then I've got others that have a PTO policy, and then for those handful of people that are in different states, they have their own leave policy for those states. So it's difficult to manage, and it's a lot of work in the HRIS system, but it can be done. I don't care which way you do it. We just need to make sure that you're following the laws for every state. Some pay transparency and salary history bands. I really like this one, and I wish that we could go to just this being a federal law across all states, because they're becoming more common in many states. And what it does for us, even though we don't have this law, is that it affects our recruiting process. Because if you think about it, many of us are recruiting for remote work. So we don't know which state is going to end up seeing our job posting. And gosh, with the way social media and the internet is, I think as soon as you post a job, it's all across the US, right? So we will, if we are hiring somebody from California, Colorado, any state that has these laws, we need to make sure that our pay transparency is on there, that we have the range for the position that we're looking for. Now, this is important because what we don't want to do is base an employee's pay on what they used to make, because then we're just perpetuating that pay equity, that indifference there. So that's why this is important. You know what you're willing to pay for the position that you have open, post that, and then offer within that. The salary history bands is also part of that, that progression towards making sure equal pay is out there. And we used to, I don't know if y'all remember way back when, we all used to fill out this huge application whenever we were going to apply for another job. And that was always a question. What did you make at these previous companies? And so this is what I mean by a salary history band. No longer are we asking that, again, because it doesn't matter. You know that you're going to pay between X and Y and Z for this role. So make sure that that's what you're going to pay. Again, this is across multi-states, not necessarily in Georgia, but it does affect you if you are recruiting for remote employees. Watch for local ordinances. I kind of mentioned that in the beginning. There's local, state, federal, city, all those kinds of ordinances. Some cities have their own rules for PTO accrual and for paid sick leave, for domestic violence leave, bereavement leave. So really just watching those. Also just minimum wage, right? In California, okay, I'm gonna stop talking about California because that's difficult to keep up with. But a lot of states are putting in minimum wage changes each year to have it raise up each year. So keeping that on a calendar. A local ordinance that I just came across with a client is for just the city of Los Angeles, just for hotel employees, and they have a different minimum wage. So it's just them. And what's fun with that is that I've got employees working at a hotel and employees not working at the hotel, both for the same company. It just depends on where they work that day. So that's fun trying to figure those out, those little local ordinances. So just, again, paying attention to all that, getting help from somebody, whether it be legal, an HR consultant, you researching it, whatever it may be, but trying to stay on top of those. It's a full-time job in and of itself, but there's definitely resources out there. And then finally, we talked about marijuana being legalized in other states. So a one-size-fits-all policy may not work, especially if you have those remote employees. So what I'd like for you to focus on there, or what I think might be the best way if you do have multi-state employees, is to really focus on what does performance look like, what does safety look like, and what does compliance look like. And if you include all three of those things in your policy, in your drug-free workplace policy, you'll be closer to getting to a good policy that works for everybody. All right. Hope I got everybody's attention still. We got some more things going on. Great. We're going to move to what handbook sections that I suggest you review each and every year. So we're going to start with the anti-harassment and conduct policies. So we want to make sure that they are, make sure that they're aligned with that EEOC guidance that I was talking to at the very beginning, making sure that you've got multiple reporting options if somebody does bring up a complaint or an issue. We want to make sure that you review your examples of prohibited conduct to ensure they cross both in office and remote employees. Remember, I discussed cyberbullying, social media misconduct. So what do we have as examples in there? It used to just be fighting, drinking on the job, but now we need to go back and maybe add a few examples of what is prohibited conduct. Now, we all know, because we've been in HR for a while, that something's going to come up that's not on that list, and then we're going to have to add it to the list at a later time. That's where a lot of these policies come from too, let's be honest, right? We didn't know we needed a policy on that until somebody did something, now we got a policy. So go back and review those prohibited conducts that you want to have listed there. Be sure that your reporting process has multiple points of contact, and then where we started. Remember, we started with why are we doing this? So what's going to be the why behind your, did I change it? Nope. What's going to be the why behind why you have these rules in place? I did switch it. Sorry, y'all. Okay. So updating your hybrid and remote work expectations. Want to make sure that we're looking at defining availability. When do they need to be available? What equipment are they using? How are they communicating? So some questions to think about when you go to either look at your current policy, or if you don't have a policy in place, creating it. Whose equipment are they using? Are they using company equipment? Most of the time they are. But what about their cell phones? Are they using their personal cell phones, a work cell phone? What sense of privacy should they feel if they are using a personal versus a company tool? So thinking about that when you're writing your policy. How do you ensure protection of company information? Do you tell them when they walk away from their computer to log out of any sensitive programs that they may be in? Do they need to shut it down at the end of the night? What are we looking at from that? Are they allowed to work hours at their own leisure if they're remote, right? So as long as the work gets done and if they've got KPIs they're getting met, are they okay to work at various hours? Or do they need to be in front of their computer working as they would be in an office from 9 to 5 based on their job or whatever the expectations are? So again, making sure that that's laid out. What about requirements for children and pets being around during virtual meetings, right? I thought about this, but I don't have any pets or children at home, so nobody's going to be interrupting us. I might get a delivery at the front door, but we can ignore it. It's fine. But what are your rules around that when you are in a remote work environment, or like the working in a coffee shop? We've got those great AirPods, right, that help us not hear the outside noise, but it doesn't prevent the other person from hearing the outside noise. So again, putting policies in place for that. One of the things that we talked about before we jumped on here is, do you require a company provided background? So you can see that Barb and Emily have really nice backgrounds. I do not. What's the company requirement on that, right? If you even have one. And if you don't have one, somebody will put something in their background that will make you create a policy out of it, because that's how we work. Finally, the other day we were talking to a professional who actually helps companies create these kinds of policies. And one of the things that he was telling us that a company put in their remote and hybrid policy was that your remote office cannot be on wheels, is what he said. So basically, you're not getting remote work so that you can go travel the world and enjoy the world. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I had honestly never thought about that as far as a policy for this. So interesting information there. Let's go to timekeeping and overtime procedures. I know we hit on this a little bit. So what to look for in your policies when you're reviewing them is really a lot around non-exempt employees, especially those working remotely. What are the standard hours? Do you have a start time and an end time, both for full-time employees and part-time employees? Again, back to what I just said before, do they need to be available? And that's, I know, what a lot of when CEOs and owners of companies are thinking about going remote, their biggest concern and scare is, am I going to be able to get in touch with them, right? And so those of us high performers are like, of course, we're just, working here versus there. But unfortunately, some people do take advantage of that. So making sure that you set out those expectations, again, based on your culture, because this handbook is their playbook. So making sure you have that laid out so that everybody understands it. Punctuality. I've got some clients who say punctuality is very important to me. If you're supposed to start at 8, you need to start at 8. I have other clients who know about Atlanta traffic and say it's fine if you get in at 8:05 or 8:10 because we understand traffic. But then what I have is some that say I require punctuality out of this team, but not out of this team. Or one manager requires punctuality and another manager doesn't. So really looking at, why is it important? And if you don't have a why, where can you be a little bit more flexible with start and end times? Breaks and meals. Do you provide breaks? Do you provide unpaid breaks? Lunch, is it required? When do they clock in and clock out? Again, big for remote employees. What are you looking for there? Do they need to notify somebody if they're going on a break and they won't be available, for those that are, let's say, constantly on the phone or in a call center? So making sure that that is part of your policy and your procedure. Clearly state in your policy that off the clock work is prohibited. Employees, especially those overachievers, will jump on and do some work here and there, and it ends up adding up. And if that beautiful, wonderful employee gets mad one day and says, I've been working and you haven't been paying me, then we got ourselves in a little bit of pickle. So make sure that we are saying explicitly, no off the clock work. So overtime is usually where we go into that. Well, they'll say, but you don't allow overtime. So do you allow overtime? Does it need to be approved first? And if yes, make sure that you have that outlined in your policy. Now, we all know, again, because we're HR professionals, if somebody works overtime and they didn't get it approved, we still have to pay them for it. But we use that as a performance conversation. I know some people or some companies that say you can have up to 5 hours of overtime each week without needing prior approval. But then after that, you need to make sure that you get approval. Spell that out if that's what your policy is. So while we're here, let's also talk about looking at your absence and tardiness policies, especially as they relate, again, to hybrid and remote employees. It's funny, generally in trainings, I feel like I say the word documentation more than anything. And today, I just keep hearing myself say hybrid and remote employees because that's the nature of the beast right now. Okay, few more handbook sections to review: confidentiality, social media, AI use. So again, confidentiality, making sure you have a clear definition of what you say confidential information is and the reason, the why. Why are we safeguarding it? So making sure that that's in your policy. We want to make sure to remind employees to limit their access of confidential information to only those who require it for their job functions. It's easy for employees to talk to people in different departments and share company information, but if they're not needing to know that information, trying to put some parameters around what to share and what not to share. Want to make sure that we're emphasizing the use of secure company-approved channels and devices for handling sensitive information. We're not emailing from our personal email address. We're not sending information, let's say, via LinkedIn, right? Or even texting, right? So using those company tools that they've been provided, especially for handling sensitive information. And then making sure that we have clear procedures for reporting if there's a potential data breach or security incidents, especially with the people who are working from home. I know that at my company, I've seen, like in our chat, somebody will say, I just got this email. Is it real? Is it not? I don't know. Should I click on it? So that's a good way of holding each other accountable for that. But I also know that I have a little button on the bottom of my computer screen that takes me directly to our IT department, and I can go straight there if I feel like there has been some type of security breach or I've been hacked. The other thing that we do there is that we have little lessons once a month on cybersecurity and all of that we have to watch a little video and take quizzes. So it's just a real big thing. So that confidentiality piece, passwords, two-factor authentication, all those fun buzzwords are definitely a real thing. When it comes to your social media policy, we're going to remind our employees that their online presence can reflect on the company and that we hope that they would be respectful and professional. Telling them that communicating or sharing confidential or proprietary information or non-public information on social media platforms is prohibited. That's not what we're looking to do. And employees, they're allowed to have their personal opinions. We all do. But if they identify themselves as employees, then they need to make sure that they're clarifying their views are their own. And that's an important piece that you want to make sure is in your social media policy. In most cases, we can't or shouldn't discipline someone for expressing their personal views, political, on social media. So we need to make sure that we are allowing everybody their social media outlet. But even if the company isn't mentioned, there's some exceptions. Like if the employee is violating company policies, referencing the company or coworkers in a harmful way, when it crosses into hate speech, or when it's creating a workplace disruption. So all big things that we need to look at as we navigate this whole new online presence, which I just don't think is going away anytime soon. So how do we adjust to that? Finally, on this top one, AI use policies. Again, we talked about this, making sure you have approved tools out there for your employees and that you have those listed out. How do you want your employees using AI? What can they use it for? Ensuring that human oversight, I know we talked about that too, for information gathered from AI, and then transparency about the use. When do they need to tell you that they've used it? What's prohibited of putting into it, so sensitive information. What's prohibited is unapproved tools, and then definitely what's prohibited is using it to generate content that's illegal, right, or harassing in nature. And that's where things can get a little bit scary, especially because I don't know if y'all have noticed, but there are videos out there that are completely AI generated, and it looks completely real. So it's hard to tell the difference between real and AI generated. So we want to make sure that we have some really good parameters around that. Second topic that I have on here is your dress code and personal appearances. We want to make sure that we reflect inclusivity and remote realities, right? So we're looking for gender neutral language in these policies, flexible and religious, cultural and personal, expression. Professionalism and safety is what we're looking at for the core guidelines. So when we're trying to figure out what does our dress code and appearance policy look like, let's look at the level of professionalism and safety as our core guidelines. We want to make sure that we are avoiding blanket statements like no piercings, no tattoos. However, if there are restrictions, especially for safety reasons, explaining the why, and then ensuring that they're applied consistently across the company. And finally, making sure that you have safety and emergency procedures in place, both for on-site, remote settings, or even one step further, because this came up with one of my clients, what to do if you're traveling. And let's say you're in a hotel, right? What does that look like? What are your safety and emergency procedures? Who needs to be notified after 911 if it's one of those kinds of cases? So making sure that those well, I was going to say 6, but there's a lot more areas that you're reviewing those every year to make sure we're keeping up with the trends. What's coming next? Emerging topics. Here's that AI one again, right? I think that's going to be here for a good while because as soon as we hang up from this webinar, AI is going to have changed. And so tomorrow I might have different information for you. So what are we looking at here? If you're using, we talked about this, AI for recruiting or evaluations, making sure that we have responsible AI use statements and that there is human oversight. Again, making sure that the human is actually the final decision because we can't teach empathy or human judgment to these AI tools. It's important to be transparent if you are using them, letting applicants know when AI is part of the decision-making process. Making sure that your HR and hiring teams understand how the tools work and what they rely on and where there could be potential biases, especially with the computer interviews. I know I saw one example about if somebody had a cadence of speech that the computer may say that they're not very eloquent, but it could just be that's the way that they speak and they're a super smart person. So that's a little bit of a dramatic example, but those things do happen. So AI should support your decision making, right, but not replace it. So the goal is to use technology responsibly, enhancing what we already do as humans with that. Some other big topics that you want to look at coming up are mental health and burnout. They're continuing to drive turnover. It's a huge deal. Some people, if you tell them it's time to come back to the office, they'll go find another job if they've been working remotely. That work-life balance is a big deal. So maybe look at adding some flexible leave options. I've got a client who went to 4-day work weeks, and their employees are loving it. Now, their employees are the one that asked for it. They did ask their employees, what would you like to see? And they're absolutely loving it. I have a couple of clients who refuse to do any work from home days and have added one, and the employees are just so happy. Like, they're just grateful to have the one. So what do your employees want? Like, what is important to them? And it's okay if you don't know the answer. Just ask them. Send out a survey. A lot of times, your team is going to have better ideas or new ideas that you hadn't even thought of that are easy to implement and maybe only cost a little bit of money here or there, and you're going to get so much happiness out of them. So really looking at that work-life balance. And then flexible scheduling and hybrid boundaries. Employees do need clarity on what's expected from them, right? So if you are the kind of company that just has KPIs and goals set in place, I think sales is probably the easiest example. You hit your goals, you hit your sales, you're good to go. Don't care if you're working at midnight or 8 a.m. If not, though, what is my flexibility with being in the office, being at home? What do I need to achieve? Are there certain things that you want me working on in the office versus at home? So that's big and emerging, especially as we continue with the hybrid, which makes it a little bit trickier. Let's see, so a couple more: cybersecurity for remote staff, right? Again, that's companies kind of lose control when they're not working there in the office. So requiring that secure Wi-Fi password, immediate reporting of breaches, the two-factor authentication, all of those good things, making sure that you have those in place. And honestly, that's just going to keep changing as computers get smarter and smarter. So those hackers have figured it all out. So this will be a topic I think you need to talk about on a regular basis, especially with the IT department. And then social and political expression, again, another huge topic. So our policies need to protect rights while also maintaining respect and professionalism. So that's just a little handful of emerging topics. Let's move to our final topic about practices for annual updates. So what are some best practices? First, like I said in the beginning, let's schedule your review annually. And when you do that review, ideally, it'd be great to involve obviously HR, legal counsel, and leadership, especially if major policies are changing. Obviously, you want leadership buy-in or need it, and then probably the policy change is coming from them anyway. But getting different eyes on it, maybe I'll speak for myself. I'm very confident in the way that I write a policy. It makes total sense to me. Why wouldn't it make sense to you? Well, because I don't communicate the same way that you do, or I've got information in my head that I assume you know. So when you have different people look at any of the policies that you're changing, especially legal if it has to do with state or employment laws, then you're going to get a different point of view. So definitely include as many people as you can. Make sure that the process stays structured and collaborative. And then when communicating updates, keep it simple. So you can send out a whole new handbook and tell them that there's changes, but remember we talked about in the beginning that employees really don't read it. So a good way would be to provide a summary. So send out the new handbook, and along with it, send a little one-pager of these are the changes in it. Or you can actually highlight them in the handbook if you want to. But make sure that you're pointing out those policies that have changed, especially if they're directly affecting your team. You want to make sure that you always get signed acknowledgments, whether electronic or paper, that document that the employees have received and reviewed the latest version. Now, sending these out through our HRIS system is amazing. And from what I can tell, I would say 80% of employees sign it immediately. And then you have those stragglers. So what I would challenge you to do is to make sure that you stay on top of those stragglers to make sure that everybody signs the handbook, because the last thing we want is for an unemployment claim to come up or an EEOC claim to come up and for them to say to us, how did this employee know they couldn't do XYZ? And we say it's in the handbook that they signed. And then we go back and we look and they're one of the ones that didn't sign it. Makes it a little bit harder again for us to enforce that policy. So finally, last thing on this, make sure that you're maintaining version control and record keeping copies of the old version, putting effective dates, summary of revision. I have one client that puts the revisions just right there on the front page and marks it so that everybody knows what's changed, and record keeping is right there on the handbook. So it's just, the handbook is invaluable when it comes to disputes, when it comes to making sure that the employee is holding up their end of the bargain, making sure we're telling our employees what's valuable to us and what we want our culture to look like. So it really is the playbook for our company. Very cool. Did everybody get all of that? Yeah, nice. Very good. All right, so should we open it up for questions, or what are we doing here? Who's in charge now?
Yeah, happy to. We have a little bit of time to open it up for any questions you all may have for Christina. All right, What is the GA drug program? Sorry, that just went away from my screen. What is the GA drug program? You mentioned from those of us who may not know.
Sure. Yeah. So the Georgia Workplace Drug-Free Program, there's the letters that go with that, is something that you can sign up for that requires you to drug test all of your employees. It requires you to have a drug testing plan in place for new hires, for reasonable suspicion, for after an incident or an accident. And you've got training that you do on a monthly basis, but you do all of this, you meet all of these qualifications, you become a certified drug-free workplace. There it is. And that in Georgia gets you, I think it's 7%, might be 8, but I think it's 7% discount on your workers' comp. So it's really a big deal. I have a lot of clients who are doing it, and then I have some clients who say, nope, can't do it because I have to test for marijuana and I just wouldn't be able to keep some of my really good employees. So that's kind of what you need to look at when it comes time to deciding if you want to be part of that drug-free, certified drug-free workplace in Georgia. It's a great question.